you'll notice that the words on the screen say institutions, democracy, infrastructure, and in your bulletin it says justice, democracy, infrastructure. That's because I came up with the title about a week and a half before I finished writing my sermon. And the further I got into it, it's really institutions that is the backbone of our democracy. And I think, as God always does, today is a perfect time to be talking about institutions. Because here we are in an institution moving forward with change coming. The same can be true of all the other institutions around us, whether they're local, statewide, or even at our national level. So this morning I really want to talk about democracy and the role of institutions in that process. Democracy, as we know, is a form of government in which the common people hold political power and can rule either directly or through elected officials. Democracy requires participation. To fully be a citizen in democracy, we must participate, or in other words, at some level, have a public life. Democracy can only exist and flourish in a society where that society believes in and practices justice for all. And as Christians, we are called to seek justice, as we heard from Micah this morning. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? So how do these concepts of justice and public participation fit into a discussion on democracy? And I'm going to be talking about this, but first of all, I want to spend a few minutes telling you a little bit about some of my life experiences that have enabled me to better understand how these all fit together. So, I didn't grow up in a little log cabin somewhere, but I did grow up in a town of about 800 residents in north central Montana. This was a close-knit and very homogeneous community, both ethnically and culturally. It was a place where every adult, to some extent, was the parent to every child. And it was difficult to do anything without your parents learning about it before you got home. Frustrating, but in many ways also reassuring. There was also an underlying belief throughout the community that if you were successful in life, it was really due to your own hard work. And if you didn't do well, then you just hadn't worked hard enough to overcome the hurdles that had been put before you. Pretty much the Western pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. My mother was a very strong influence on my beliefs and values, and her most important and consistent messages were to do the best you can in anything that you tackle. And don't start something if you don't intend to finish it. These messages were also reinforced by teachers, Girl Scout leaders, and church youth group leaders. After graduating from high school, I attended college at the University of Montana, a place really not very much different at all from where I grew up, just a little bit larger. This was in the 60s, and we all know there was a lot of turmoil and things going on in the 60s. Somehow that just really did not touch my life at that time. But my life changed dramatically after graduating from college. I went from this small, very homogeneous community to Boston to do a dietetic internship in a large hospital in a low-income, primarily African-American community, Roxbury, for those who are familiar with Boston, at a time where there was a lot of racial unrest. There was a lot of concern about immigration in schools and really a lot of divides. I interacted daily with people that were very different from me, both culturally and ethnically, and I really saw for the first time inequities and injustice and how people were treated and the opportunities that they had. That it wasn't just a matter of working hard. For some people, things were stacked against them. I then moved to Minneapolis and with a job at Mount Sinai Hospital, a hospital funded after many, many, many years of hard work by the local Jewish community to serve everyone, but it was built specifically to provide medical internships and residencies for Jewish medical students who did not have equal access to those programs in other institutions. I left Mount Sinai to go to graduate school in Missouri, and there I met David. We got married. I got my degree, and we moved to Jefferson City, the capital. And in Jefferson City, we both worked at Lincoln University, a historically black college. The student body was about 50-50 African American and white. The faculty was about 80% African American. Again, many racial divides. Social interaction between the larger community and the highly educated Lincoln faculty was very limited. They had their own social sphere. We met many great friends, participated in university social life, often being 2 out of 4 Caucasian people at a very large event. An experience that anyone who is raised always being in the majority really needs to experience. We also were very active members at the First United Methodist Church and developed other relationships with the community. And being in several distinct groups, we really saw the inequities and opportunities, disparities in services, especially healthcare, and really the lack of communication and misunderstanding between different groups. My final move was to Nevada, and my career here was primarily in community nutrition, and I also worked as a part-time instructor at UNLV teaching community nutrition, and a course that I developed, Food and Nutrition, Law and Policy. And Nevada was no different than other places I had been in terms of some of the inequities I saw. All of these experiences demonstrated to me that we are not all protected equally by laws and policies. And although I have not personally suffered from inequality or injustice to any significant degree, over and over again, I have seen as just things happen to others and have grown to understand that all of us are affected when some people do not have justice, and that we should act to make changes to promote justice for all. Doing research to develop my class on law and policy educated me on the process of changing laws, as well as how hard it can be to do this, but it was still really an academic endeavor, not something I thought that I could do, not really an integral part of me. Then the specter of retirement loomed on the horizon, and I started thinking about, what do I want my next chapter to be? I wasn't ready to just sit back and relax. I started volunteering at the Some Pantry, but something was missing until May of 2012 and the organizing convocation that was the beginning of Nevadans for the Common Good. 1,500 people from diverse backgrounds, ethnically, culturally, and in faith tradition, coming together with a common goal of participating in public life to make their lives and their communities better, to bring about change. There was so much energy in the room, I just wanted to be part of it. I saw a way that I could work to help make change happen. The only words I can use to describe my feelings that night were exhilaration, being somewhat overwhelmed, and at the same time really felt empowered. I had found what I hadn't been able to put into words, but what I wanted to spend my time learning and doing. At the convocation, it was announced that Robert Hu had been hired as the lead organizer for NCG. Little did I know then what that would mean for me. From the fall of 2012 until Robert moved to LA in October of 2017, he mentored and guided me on my path of growing more fully into a public person and working for change. It wasn't always easy. He pushed me to look within myself and examine my beliefs, my values, my goals. My experiences with everyone in Events for the Common Good, and Robert in particular, has transformed how I view life and my responsibilities as a public person. I changed from viewing an institution as something to which I belong to something that I am making a commitment to work with to further the mission of that institution. Institutions hold individuals accountable. Institutions build on the concepts of equality and fairness and provide a framework in which people can come together, discuss issues, build relationships, and act together to achieve common goals and justice. Institutions also have sustainability. Big changes like ending slavery, establishing child labor laws, extending voting or women's rights, extending rights for the LGBTQ community. Takes time, often more than a generation. Institutions can be there for the long haul, whereas any one individual can't. Remember today's Bible reading about the judge and the woman? If it's worth fighting for, you fight until it is done. Persistence is essential. Strong, or what is sometimes called thick institutions, have some of the following characteristics. They're diverse. They involve formation and learning. They develop leaders, increased understanding of the purpose of that institution. They have a mission beyond themselves. And they provide a vehicle for action. Thick institutions also leave a mark on the people in them. You remember being part of that institution. It becomes part of your identity. And it has a physical location where people meet, interact, build relationships. What are thick institutions in your life? Is Boulder City United Methodist Church one of them? It is for me. But others that are thick institutions that have impacted my life, Girl Scouts had a big impact. Although this is an informal institution, for a year during my internship in Boston, I lived in a house with 13 other interns. We had to come up with our own rules, how we were going to live together, what we were going to do, how we were going to manage things, and we were locked together for a year in this very intense learning environment. I will never forget that 1 year. It had a profound impact on me. But we live at a time when institutions are declining. According to Yanni Applebaum, an American historian and journalist, participation in civic groups and organizations of all kinds declined precipitately in the last decades of the 20th century and has accelerated since then. One study found that from 1994 to 2004, membership in such groups fell by 21%. At the same time, there seems to be a slight increase in passive membership. In other words, I belong, but I'm not doing anything in terms of belonging. How many of you have children that are not actively involved in any type of institution today? This is a really growing trend in the younger adults demographic. This declining participation in institutions is concerning. It leads to fewer people really understanding the important role institutions play in bringing people together to work for the common good and in protecting democracy. In fact, they may become distrustful of this whole process that is essential to democracy. We also need to guard against only looking inward as an institution or losing sight of that institution's mission. Members need to guard against focusing on personal goals rather than institutional goals. When these things happen, an institution can stray away from its focus on justice and the common good. People have no innate democratic instinct. In other words, we are not born yearning to set our own desires aside for the majority. We just are not born that way. Democracy is instead an acquired habit. And like most habits, democratic behavior develops slowly over time through constant repetition. We learn to practice democracy where? Through the institutions in which we participate. Participating in institutions like church, a professional or trade association, or a local civic group binds people together. These people develop a mission, they establish rules, elect officers, and make decisions by majority vote. That is how democracy works, and that's how we learn to be part of democracy. Historically, it is through local institutions that Americans have learned how to practice democracy. In fact, some historians think that a major reason why the American Revolution didn't devolve into violence and anarchy like the French Revolution is that America as a group of colonies had already developed the practice of working through institutions. Trade associations, educational institutions, they knew how institutions work. Without this institutional mindset, they might not have been able to come together as a continental Congress to work through differences and develop a constitution. So we need to continually ask ourselves, what does it mean for our democracy if people aren't participating in institutions? What does it mean for our democracy if our institutions spend most of their time and energy looking inward at themselves rather than outward to their community and the larger world? How can we act out our mission to seek justice and transform our community without institutions? As United Methodists, we have a strong institutional tradition to draw in the example of John Wesley. Luke Brotherton, a professor of theological ethics at Duke University, wrote how John Wesley acted on social concerns that are just as important today as they were in his lifetime. Wesley understood that reweaving the social fabric requires not just morals and mutuality, but intervening institutions and organizing. Wesley also believed that instead of focusing our efforts on helping the people who can provide charity, we should instead be focusing our efforts on those in need, enabling them to act and to speak for themselves. And in fact, this is the iron rule of modern community organizing. Never do for others what they can do for themselves. So it's important that we help train people so they can speak for themselves. Creating change involves more than just kind-hearted people. It needs intervention, institutions, and organizing. The Wesleyan quadrilateral also fits in our discussion on justice, institutions, and democracy. The quadrilateral describes the principal factors that John Wesley believed illuminate the core of the Christian faith for the believer. And these four factors are Scripture, which is the most important, tradition, that's our group experience through the past and our culture, reason, discernment, and thought, thus the name Methodist, and experience, which is how our individual understanding grows. All institutions need this in order to move forward and to act in the world. Strong institutions have the power to act and accomplish things that individuals can't. When several institutions act together across lines of diversity to achieve a specific goal, their capacity is exponentially greater. For example, when the Boulder City Cluster, which is Boulder City United Methodist Church, St. Christopher's Episcopal, and St. Andrew's Catholic Church worked together a few years ago, they brought more than $60,000 in grant money to Boulder City to address hunger. When Nevadans for the Common Good's 49-member institution worked together in 2017, they got the state to commit $3.4 million additional dollars to support the Meals on Wheels program. And as I speak, NCG is working hard to protect consumers against predatory lending practices. The hearing to get it through the assembly is Friday afternoon. It is through individual people within member institutions working together actively, including Boulder City United Methodist Church, to bring about change, and we are changing Nevada. These principles I've discussed today are really the cornerstone of Nevada for the Common Good identity and its work, which has become my work. My mother is gone, but her counsel on persistence is alive and well with me. I'm working till I can't do it anymore. I end with John Wesley's words. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the places that you can, at all the time you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can.